Boxing Truth here. Feeling a little under the weather, so I might sound different in this video. But I wanted to comment on the James Degale Porky Medina fight that I actually finally just really sit down and watch in its entirety, actually score the fight round by round. And judging from the comments on, social media, boxing fans that watched the fight, I can concur that I can agree with a lot of fans that thought Porky Medina won the fight because I scored the fight for Porky Medina 7 rounds to 5 in a fight that was competitive in spots, close, but to me there was one clear winner of the fight, and that was Porky Medina, who was the aggressor throughout, drew a lot more punches, outworked Degale, landed a lot of body shots, landed a lot of combinations. I mean, Degale was doing a little too much movement, trying to look a little too flashy in there, trying to be a slickster, but he's not really that slick because he got hit a lot by Porky Medina. Didn't show any great defense, was pot shotting, trying to land these flashy lead uppercuts from the southpaw and orthodox stances, but he was just only fighting in spurts, was having lapses of not focusing in the ring like he usually does. Makes fights more difficult than what they should be. Just not a good performance by James Degale. It wasn't his night. He got marked up by a gatekeeper, a guy with 6 L's who's always lost every time he stepped up. And Degale didn't put it down. He didn't make no statements. He's not making any super middleweights in the world have the jitters. No one's shaking in their boots if they have to fight James Degale. Degale was talking a lot of shit before the fight, saying that he's levels above Porky Medina. He's gonna make easy work of him. That he's no world beater, but I'm starting to question if James Degale is a world beater himself. In my eyes, he lost to a gatekeeper in Porky Medina. Got outworked, got out punched, got out hit, and just look at both guys' faces. You see James Degale got marked up, a little beat up, and he refused to acknowledge that Porky Medina was on his level that night, possibly surpassed him, because I scored it for Porky Medina 7 rounds to 5. Degale tried to play it off, stick his tongue out, was showing frustration in the bout, fouling, throwing elbows at Porky Medina, was trying to stick his tongue out, just refusing to acknowledge that he was in a real fight, in a real tough fight that he barely pulled out. I mean, look at the crowd's reaction at the DC Armory. You pretty much know that the crowd felt that Porky Medina won the fight. And Degale got a gift decision. That's just all it is, because, I mean, the judges' scorecards were atrocious. There was only one judge that actually had a reasonable score. He scored it 115, 113 for Degale. But the other two judges' scorecards, 117, 111, just ridiculous scorecards, predetermined, were bought before the bout. They turned in scorecards where you pretty much know the judges didn't even watch the fight. But there were some close rounds in the fight. There were rounds that were swing rounds. There was a round that Degale stole. I mean, some of the rounds Degale won, he stole them. He would get outworked for much of the round. It was very consistent what Porky was doing. He was more consistent in the rounds that he won, was landing more shots, was more aggressive, and he wasn't fighting in spots like Degale was. Degale would explode at times, throw combinations, but he was trying to steal some rounds, and sometimes he was successful and sometimes he was not. Through 6 rounds, I had it 4 rounds to 2 for Porky Medina. Then Degale made a slight comeback. He had a good stretch of boxing, much better in some rounds, but then he got dominated in the 10th and the 11th rounds. Lost those rounds pretty big in my eyes. It was the most clear-cut rounds of either fighter that either fighter won that night. In the 12th round, you could make a case for either guy winning. I gave it to Degale. Not really much happened in that round. But this is just to talk about Degale and how he's full of himself ever since he won that title. thinks he's an elite fighter, despite not still having a lot to prove. And his ego is just much better than his actual fighting ability at the moment. I'm not really impressed. I'm not impressed with James Degale, and I've never been impressed. He makes fights a lot difficult than when they need to be. Now he's in life and death struggles with faded guys like Lucian Bute. Also, arguably losing to a gatekeeper in Porky Medina. I just don't see a great fighter. I don't see an elite fighter. And right now, to me, he's the weakest link of the super middleweight division if you take out Felix Sturm, who's currently going through some troubles after a positive drug test. So, this is a question for y'all. Who is the strongest link in the super middleweight division after this past weekend's fights? Is it Gilberto Ramirez? Is it Badu Jack? Is it James Degale? To me, I think Badu Jack is a little better. Judging from their performances, he's a little better than James Degale. Porky Medina would agree, stating that Badu Jack is a lot better than James Degale. I think Zerto and Jack right now are in the lead in terms of who is the man of the division. To me, James Degale is the weakest link of the champions that are currently available to fight and not going through some bullshit with drug testing protocols. But right now, jumping from their performances, I got Badu Jack beating James Degale. I got Gilberto Zerto Ramirez beating James Degale. I just don't see an elite fighter. I see an inconsistent fighter who has some skills, but he doesn't have great power, doesn't have great speed, doesn't have great boxing ability, doesn't have great defense. So if I'm Eddie Hearn, I'm not all upset that Al Heyman stole James Degale from him, because he's gonna lose to the next B-level fighter he fights. And also, Eddie Hearn's got Callum Smith waiting in the wings for a title shot, #1 contender for the WC strap that Badu Jack holds. So I'm not really sweating that Al Heyman stole James Degale when he has Callum Smith, who's a big super middleweight, knocking guys out, looking good, on the verge of a world title shot. So doesn't really matter. He pretty much has another fighter in the stable in Callum Smith, moving up in the rankings. James Degale, disappointing performance. Needs to start showing that he's the type of fighter that he says he is, that he's an elite fighter. Because he trashed Medina, saying that he was the worst mandatory challenger out there, but that he's strong, but he ain't on his level. But bro, from what I saw, man, you ain't even on Porky Medina's level. This is boxing truth. I'm out.